Right, hello everybody. Really nice to be here. I hope you're all nicely thawed out with this surprise snow. I hope I can get home as well. So, just like to thank the organisers for inviting me to talk here today. So I'll be talking about recreating past life ways through bioarchaeology. And this forms the basis of my PhD research, which is still very much work in progress, but my aim today is just to give you a snapshot of the bioarchaeological research to date. So I assume most of you would have seen Martin's talk yesterday on Portmahomack, so I won't really go into detail about the site, just mostly about the burials. So two distinct phases were discovered from the burials. The first phase dates to the 6th to 12th centuries AD, and the second phase dating to around the 12th to 16th centuries AD. Now, the monks at Portmahomack belonged to an early Christian order, but unlike more well-known orders such as the Benedictines or Cistercians, very little was known of the religious and social identities of these early Christian communities, which is where primary evidence through bioarchaeology proves invaluable. So the first phase burials were mainly of middle-aged and elderly males, and along with archaeological finds of a religious nature, those that Martin mentioned yesterday, such as stones depicting the apostles and Latin inscriptions, this burial pattern suggests an early monastic community, or early Christian community. With the second phase burials, the majority of which belong to the 14th to 16th centuries AD, we see more of a normal demographic with burials of men, women and children, and these represent a lay parish church community. So just to clarify, we have two temporally distinct groups here. We have periods 1 to 3, which I'll, just for ease of explanation, refer to as the monastic group, and periods 4, which I'll refer to as the lay or parish church group. So first case study, trauma at the monastic phase of the site. Now, an osteology report was done by Sarah King back in 2000, and she discovered some trauma on some of the skeletons. So this is an adult male, aged 26 to 35 years of death, and what was found here was 3 cut marks to the cranium. Now, all of these have sharp beveled edges, suggesting they were caused by some bladed weapon, probably a sword, and it suggests that the victim was either trying to run away or was sort of attacked from behind. So you have the first cuts here on the back of the head, and then what was probably the final blow down onto the top of the head. Either the victim had fallen to the ground, or the assailant had sort of came down with the sword on top of the head. Now, the trauma to the skull is actually unhealed. All 3 cuts are unhealed. There's no sign of any healing, so it suggests that this individual had died of these injuries. Okay, so moving on, it's another case study. This is another adult male. He's aged 46 to 59 years of death. And we have 2 depressions here. This depression here and here. This again were blade wounds to the top of the head, and this individual also had a number of broken ribs on the left side of the body. Now these were either caused by a fall onto an object that caused a fracture to the side of the body on the left side, or they could have been caused around the same time as the weapon-related trauma on the head. So it could be something more sinister, like blows to the side of the body, either by punches or kicks. We'll never know, but either way, both these injuries had healed long before death. So it suggests that this individual was at least cared for during the time. He had time to rest, to heal his ribs, for them to knit back together, and he would have certainly have had some treatment on his head to the severe blade wounds. There's no sign of infection or anything, and they're healed very well. Now, both of these skeletons date to around the 8th to 9th centuries AD, suggesting they were at the monastery when an attack occurred, which is thought to have been by Viking raiders. There's evidence of a fire that swept through an area of the site, and also, as I've just mentioned, blade wounds on a number of individuals. Okay, moving forward in time, we come to a couple of case studies from the lay parish church community. So, you forgive me for moving away from the early medieval period for a moment, but these burials are still very important in the bioarchaeological context. So this is again an adult male. Males didn't have much luck at Portmahomack. He's aged 36 to 45 years of death, and new examinations here found what's known as discrete stellate scarring on the left side of the frontal bone. So it's It's very discreet. I know it's difficult to see, but it's kind of this lumpy sort of scarring formation. This is an extreme example here of, this is known as Curry's sicca, and it's diagnostic of treponemal disease, such as venereal syphilis. Hope you've all digested your breakfasts. No gory photographs, I promise. So this is known as Curry's sicca. This is an extreme example here, where you get scarring and then erosive lesions and then disorganized bone formation diffusely on the cranium. Now, previous examinations found other pathological lesions on the skeleton, including new bone formation on the lower legs, so sign of infection. So along with the changes to the skull and the lower legs, this distribution of pathologies can be associated with treponemal disease. This is another possible case of treponemal. This was discovered on a child skeleton aged around 11 to 14 years at death. And previous examinations again found infectious bone deposits on the lower right femur, so at the back towards the knee, so this is infectious new bone. And new examinations also found a small lytic lesion on the frontal bone, so this lesion here. All we can say, there's no pathological markers that suggest congenital syphilis, such as changes to the teeth or the nose area. So it's highly unlikely that this was an infection that was passed on from the mother. So all we can say at present is that there's some form of non-specific infection, but we can't rule out treponemal disease through non-sexual skin contact. So it could be possible that both these individuals were either related or at least in close contact with each other. These are the only two cases of probable treponemal at Portmahomack. So the child could have contracted the infection from the adult through skin contact. Now, these two individuals belong to a period that coincided with the emergence of syphilis in Scotland around the 15th to 16th centuries AD. And in medieval Scotland, as you may well know, syphilis was referred to as the Grand Gore, and the Grand Gore Act of 1497 stated that incurables were to be exiled to more remote places, such as the island of Inchkeith, until such a time that they were cured by God. So as you can imagine, most of these people didn't leave these remote islands. But by the late 15th century, syphilis had spread across Scotland to places such as Glasgow and Stirling, and even nobles and royalty weren't immune. In fact, it suggested that Mary, Queen of Scots' husbands, both had venereal syphilis, and Mary herself has thought to have described her second husband, Darnley, as being a pockish man whose breath was most foul. So this just gives you an idea of the disease possible disease at Portmahomack at the time and the emergence of syphilis in this area. Okay, so moving away from that, we go on to another case study. This is diet at Portmahomack. This was a pilot study that was done to reconstruct the diets of some of the individuals using carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis. Now, I apologise, I haven't got time to sort of go into detail of how carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis work, but put it very generally, the higher in nitrogen, the more higher trophic level foods are being consumed. So you have low in nitrogen plants, for example, then herbivores, omnivores, carnivores. So depending on where you are in the nitrogen value determines what type of food you're eating. Similarly, with the more enriched in carbon, suggests that the consumption of marine foods or consumption of C4 foods, those that are grown in more tropical zones, such as the Americas, such as sugarcane. So what the results found here was a nice division in isotope values between the two groups. So I said before, this is the early Christian group here, and then we have the later parish church group here. So with the early monastic group, they had lower carbon and nitrogen values. And so this suggests they had a predominantly terrestrial-based diet with no input of marine foods or C4 plant foods, which is understandable as C4 plants are not native to Britain. So along with the faunal bone evidence, this suggests they were consuming foods such as pork, beef, and lamb, and native cereal foods. With the later lay parish church community, we see higher carbon and nitrogen values, and they were probably consuming similar terrestrial foods such as pork, beef, And when we look at the faunal isotope results, so these are the humans we've just been looking at circled. When we include the faunal isotope results, we see that the humans from both phases are trophic level higher than their corresponding fauna. So by that I mean, for example, this is the cattle from the monastic phase. So they're herbivores, low in nitrogen. Then you have the omnivores, such as the pigs, they're higher in nitrogen, and the humans consuming these animals, higher in the trophic level. And the same for the late phase. So you have your cattle, pig, and the humans. But there's also this carbon shift in the later phase at Portmahomack. So they're going more towards marine values. So it suggests they were eating fish by this phase. So why the inclusion of fish in the later lay period of Portmahomack, but not in the early monastic period? Remember, we're right on the coast here as well. One reason could be due to population increase, resulting in an increased fishing trade in the later periods, and this has been noted in a number of recent studies, such as those by James Barrett. Associated to this could be the widespread adoption of the Benedictine rule of fasting in the later periods, where fish replaced prescribed meat on fast days. So what we may be seeing at Portmahomack is different forms of fasting throughout the periods. So with the earlier Christian phase, as I say, we don't know what rule they were following, whether they were following a Roman rule, such as those at 7th century Lindisfarne, or whether they were following a rule of Irish origin, or they had their own unorthodox rule. We don't know, but they could have had some abstinence form of fasting. So they didn't eat meat on fast days, but they didn't feel the need to replace that with fish. They could just eat bread and water. Although you can't isotopically determine water from carbon and nitrogen. By the later periods, what we're seeing is the widespread adherence to the Benedictine rule of fasting. People by this phase know that you can replace meat with fish on fast days. So overall, this study shows a diachronic change in diet at Portmahomack. Remember, this is just a pilot study, so these are just a small selection from the site. But it just showed a diachronic change in diet with the inclusion of marine foods in the later phase. So just to conclude, as you just heard, stable isotope analysis can provide evidence of changes in diet and possibly evidence of religious influences. Osteological examinations suggest evidence of disease and violence on some individuals, but also care of the sick and wounded at Portmahomack. And further results from this study will shed more light on the lifeways of these individuals and contribute to a greater understanding of life in medieval Scotland. The isotope analysis on the whole assemblage is currently underway, and results from this should come in later this year. So it'll be really interesting to see whether that pattern is still followed, the division in diets and the change of diet over time. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.